Vienna, Austria, October 12, 2019. Something is happening on the third floor of the Mozart House Museum that nobody can explain. A small English boy, 4-year-old Oliver Matthews, is standing in front of a keyboard. His mother, Sarah, just wanted to take a tourist photo. But what Oliver does is not something a normal child could do. The child sits at the keyboard, places his fingers on the keys, and begins to play. But he's not just playing, he's performing Mozart's Sonata K-331, the section known as the Turkish March, without sheet music, without a single mistake. For 47 seconds, museum staff, visitors, and Sarah Matthews hold their breath and watch. When the music ends, Oliver gets up from the keyboard and turns to his mother. There are tears in his eyes. "Mummy," he says quietly, "I miss my sister. Nannerl always sat here and listened when I played." Sarah freezes. Her son had never heard anything about Mozart. He had never taken piano lessons, and he certainly couldn't know the name Nannerl, the nickname of Mozart's sister, Maria Anna. "Darling," Sarah kneels down to look at her son. "How do you know that name?" Oliver looks at his mother, but his eyes are in another time, another place, because she was my sister, in my other life, when I was Wolfgang. The museum attendant, a young music student named Klaus Bergmann, has recorded the entire scene on his cell phone. That evening he sends the video to his professor at the University of Music and Performing Arts, Vienna. The subject line is just 3 words. Sie müssen das sehen. You must see this. The next morning, Sarah Matthews' phone rings. The caller is Professor Dr. Heinrich Adler, Mozart expert and head of the musicology department. His voice trembles as he speaks. "Mrs. Matthews, I received the video recorded in our museum yesterday. Your son played K-331. Perfectly. Has he had music training?" "No." Sarah's voice is weak. "Oliver has never taken piano lessons. We don't even have a piano at home." A long silence on the phone. Then Professor Adler's voice comes, but this time very different. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm going to ask you a very strange question. Does your son have unusual behaviors? Does he talk about an old time, say things he shouldn't know?" Sarah sighs. Finally, someone is asking. "Yes, there's a lot." From that day on, nothing will ever be the same. Because Oliver Matthews isn't just playing Mozart's music, he's living Mozart's life, and he knows details that should be impossible to know. Sarah Matthews and her husband David had actually noticed Oliver's strange behaviors much earlier, but they had dismissed them as childish imagination. Until that day in Vienna, when Oliver was 2 years old, when he couldn't even form complete sentences yet. He had strange reactions when classical music played on the home radio. Once when Mozart's Symphony No. 40 was playing, the child suddenly started crying. "Sad," he kept saying, "so sad. I wrote this when Papa was dying." David had written this down in a notebook, but didn't think much of it. Children said strange things, but as the details began to accumulate, they could no longer ignore them. At age 3, Oliver had seen an illustration of 18th century Vienna in a picture book and immediately recognized it. That's Stephansplatz. The cathedral is there, and our house was 3 streets away, near the Graben. Sarah searched Google that evening. Mozart's family had indeed lived near Stephansdom Cathedral, in the Graben area. But how did Oliver know this information? Now, on their way to meet Professor Adler in Vienna, Sarah was thinking about all these memories. The professor met them in his office at the university. Mozart manuscripts on the walls, pictures of antique instruments, old sheet music. When Oliver entered the room, he walked directly to a reproduction on the wall. It was the famous Mozart family portrait, Wolfgang, Nannerl, and their father, Leopold. "That's wrong," the child said definitively. "The harpsichord angle is incorrect. It was positioned more to the left, and Nannerl's dress was darker blue, not this light shade." Professor Adler's pen dropped from his hand. The original of that portrait was in the Mozart Museum in Salzburg, and years of restoration work had been done on it. Experts indeed thought that some colors had changed, and the original composition might have been slightly different. But this information was not public. "Oliver," the professor spoke gently, "how do you know this painting?" The child looked at him as if the answer was obvious. "Because I was there when they painted it. I was 7 years old. The painter's name was Johann Nepomuk della Croce. He had a funny beard, and he smelled like oil paint and tobacco." Professor Adler immediately started taking notes. Johann Nepomuk della Croce was indeed responsible for that portrait, from the 1780-81 period. And period records did mention that the man smoked tobacco. But this detail wasn't in any museum booklet, in any children's book. "Mrs. Matthews," the professor spoke carefully, "I need to subject your son to comprehensive tests, musical tests, historical knowledge tests, and perhaps most importantly, I need to have him play musical pieces he's never been shown." Sarah and David looked at each other. There was no turning back from this point. "Also," the professor continued, "I'll consult with a child psychologist and a regression therapist. This is an extraordinary situation." Oliver had been walking around the office during this entire conversation, examining the sheet music from the shelves. Suddenly he stopped and pointed to a folder. "May I see that one?" The professor took the folder. Inside were photocopies of an unpublished Mozart composition being prepared for the Neue Mozart Ausgabe. Oliver examined the pages and then said something incredible. "There's a mistake here. This note should be D-flat, not D-natural." "Remember writing this? It was late at night, December 1783, and I was tired. My copyist made this error later." Professor Adler's heart began to race. He looked at the note. In musical analyses, that note was indeed considered questionable, possibly a copyist error. But the final decision hadn't been made yet. How could a 4-year-old child know this? The next day, the tests began. Professor Adler's team brought Oliver to a special music studio. The room was soundproof, containing a Steinway grand piano, recording equipment, and one-way glass for observation. The first test was simple. Oliver was asked to play a known work of Mozart. The child chose the Turkish March, the same one he'd played at the museum. This time they were fully recording, for sound analysis. Oliver played the piano, again perfectly. But this time Professor Adler noticed something: the child's finger positions, the way he touched the keys, the tempo preferences. These were 18th century technique. Modern piano education didn't teach like this. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Elizabeth Kramer, a period music specialist. "He's using historically informed technique. No one taught him this." The second test was harder. Oliver was given an unheard Mozart piece from the Neue Mozart Ausgabe archives, a minuet that existed only in manuscript, never recorded. Could he read the notation? The child looked at the music and smiled. "Oh, this one. I wrote this for Nannerl's birthday. She loved dancing." Then he began to play. Slow tempo, elegant, almost melancholy. Dr. Kramer started crying. The style was completely correct, period appropriate, technique proper, interpretation perfect. The third test was the strangest. Oliver was given a Mozart piece written with wrong notes. The researchers had deliberately changed some notes. Would he notice? Oliver examined the notation and frowned. "This is wrong. These 3 measures are incorrect." He pointed to exactly the altered sections. "Why did you change my music?" Everyone in the room froze. The child wasn't just knowing the music, he was claiming ownership of it. Professor Adler spoke through the microphone. "Oliver, did you write this music?" The child looked at him, a strange sadness in his eyes. "Yes, I wrote this in 1787. It was for a court performance, but the emperor didn't like it. He said it had too many notes. The professor's hair stood on end. Emperor Joseph II had indeed told Mozart, "Zu viele Noten." Too many notes. This was a famous historical anecdote. But how did Oliver know? After the test ended, Sarah and David were called to the waiting room. Professor Adler had brought two more people, Dr. Anna Hoffman, child psychologist, and Dr. Michael Steiner, a psychiatrist specializing in regression therapy. Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, Professor Adler spoke seriously. Your son, scientifically speaking, is accomplishing impossibilities. His musical abilities are at genius level. His historical knowledge is on par with academic experts. And his manner of speaking, his behaviors, even some gestures, appropriate for 18th century Austrian aristocracy. What are you trying to say? David's voice was tense. Dr. Steiner interjected, "We cannot rule out the reincarnation hypothesis. Oliver's condition shows classic past life recall characteristics. But we need to gather evidence, more tests, perhaps regression hypnosis, and most importantly," he paused, "we need to go to Salzburg." Salzburg? Sarah was surprised. Yes, the house where Mozart was born and raised is still standing. It's a museum now. If Oliver is truly experiencing reincarnation, he might recognize things there, rooms never shown, hidden details, under scientific protocol. Sarah and David's heads were spinning. Reincarnation? Could this be real? But they couldn't find another explanation for what their son was doing. There's one condition, Dr. Hoffman added. We need to protect Oliver's psychological state. If he's truly experiencing past life recall, this could be traumatic for him, especially since Mozart's death was young and painful. Oliver entered from the hallway at that moment, holding a glass of water. He had overheard the conversation. "Don't worry," he said calmly. "I know how I died. It still makes me sad, but I'm not scared. I want to go back to Salzburg. I want to see my first home again." Everyone silently looked at the child. A 4-year-old boy was talking about his own death, as if it had happened yesterday. Salzburg, Austria. October 28, 2019. Getreidegasse. Number 9, the house where Mozart was born, is now one of the most visited museums in the world. But today, the museum is closed to normal visitors. Because today, science history may witness the most important reincarnation test ever conducted. Oliver Matthews and his family arrive at the museum early in the morning with Professor Adler's team. They're accompanied by cameras, audio recording devices, and a team of psychologists. Everything will be documented. As Oliver gets out of the vehicle, he looks up at the yellow-fronted building. His eyes are shining. "I'm home," he whispers. Then he starts running, but not to the main entrance, to a narrow alley beside the building. "Oliver, wait!" Sarah runs after him, but the child doesn't stop. In the alley, there's a small wooden door, half closed, a service entrance. "This was our family entrance," Oliver points to the door. "The main door was for visitors and students. We used this one. There are 17 steps up to our floor." The museum director, Frau Schneider, is shocked. "Das ist richtig," she whispers. "That's correct. This entrance was indeed used by the family during Mozart's time. But this information only exists in historical documents. It's not mentioned in museum tours." They take the group inside. Oliver stands in the main entrance hall and looks around. "Everything is different," he says in a sad voice. The walls were darker. There was a portrait of Archbishop Colloredo here. Papa hated him, but we had to display it. And the floor had a crack shaped like a lightning bolt, right there. Professor Adler immediately takes notes. "Frau Schneider, do you have records about the 18th century flooring?" The director nods. "The floor was renewed in the 1820s, but in old drawings there's indeed a crack mentioned, described as lightning-shaped." They go upstairs. As Oliver climbs the stairs, he counts 15, 16, 17. Exactly 17 steps. Upstairs is the museum's main hall. Objects from Mozart's childhood, instruments, period furniture. But Oliver walks directly in another direction, to a narrow corridor where museum tours don't normally go. My room was here. He points to a small door. Nannerl's room was next door. We shared this wall, and at night we would knock on it 3 times for good night, 4 times for I can't sleep. Frau Schneider is astonished. That room is currently used as storage. It's never been restored, not open to the public. Can we see it? Dr. Hoffman asks. The director takes out keys and opens the door. Inside is small, dusty, full of boxes and old museum equipment. But Oliver wants to go in. May I? He asks. They give permission. The child enters the room and walks directly to a wall. He places his hand on a specific point on the wall. Behind this wall, I hid my secret compositions, the ones Papa didn't approve of. I wrote them when I was 6. They're still there. Everyone's heart stops. Oliver, Professor Adler speaks carefully. Are you saying there's something behind the wall? Yes. Wrapped in leather, inside a wooden box. I hid it in a cavity in the wall. There should be 17 pages. This is crazy. But they couldn't ignore Oliver anymore. Professor Adler speaks with the museum director. We can bring ground-penetrating radar. Non-invasive, just to check. Frau Schneider hesitates but finally agrees. Okay, but without damage. 2 days later, the radar team arrives. They scan the point Oliver indicated, and the results are definitive. There's a cavity inside the wall, and in that cavity there's something showing density difference, probably organic material. Restoration experts are called. At the end of October, under historical preservation protocols, they carefully open the wall. Behind it there's indeed a small cavity, the type used in 18th century construction techniques. And inside the cavity there's something. A small package wrapped in brown, old leather. Inside a wooden box. Inside the box, 17 pages of handwritten musical notation. Paper from the 18th century. Ink from the 18th century. And the handwriting, mein Gott, Professor Adler's voice trembles as he whispers. Das ist Mozart's Handschrift. Mozart's handwriting. The pages are taken to the laboratory. Paper analysis, ink analysis, handwriting comparison, everything. Results come 3 weeks later. Paper, production between 1760-1770, Salzburg region. Ink, iron gall mixture, 18th century composition. Handwriting, 99.2% match rate with young Mozart's known handwriting. Music, previously unknown compositions. Style analysis shows these may have been written around 1762, when Mozart was 6 years old. But not in the official catalog because Mozart's father Leopold never published them. The world is shaken. Media goes crazy. 4-year-old boy discovers lost Mozart manuscripts. Child claims to be Mozart reincarnated, then proves it. But this is just the beginning, because Oliver says he knows more secrets. November 2019. Oliver and his team are now in Vienna, the city where Mozart spent his final years. The composer had died here in 1791, at only 35 years old. The cause of death was still disputed. Maybe rheumatic fever, maybe poisoning, maybe something else. Oliver wants to be taken to Zentralfriedhof, Vienna's central cemetery. I need to see where they buried me, he says. But it's not where people think. Mozart's exact burial place is unknown. In the 18th century, the poor were buried in mass graves. However, in 1855, a memorial grave had been built at the estimated location. As they approach the memorial grave, Oliver shakes his head. That's not right. That's not where I am. Where is it, Oliver? Dr. Steiner asks. Where is the real grave? The child starts walking in the cemetery, as if something is pulling him. Finally, he stops, in an unmarked old area. "Here, I was buried. Here. There were 8 other people in the same grave. I was the 5th. Professor Adler checks the records. Indeed, that area was a mass grave area in the 18th century, and according to records, 9 people were buried in that section in December 1791. "Oliver," the professor asks gently, "do you remember the day you died?" The child's eyes fill with tears. "Yes, it was December 5th, 1791. I had been sick for 2 weeks. Constanza was with me, my wife. She was crying. I tried to finish the requiem, but I couldn't. My hands wouldn't work anymore." He pauses, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of leaving my music unfinished. There was so much more I wanted to write. So many symphonies, so many operas still in my head." Sarah hugs her son, but Oliver continues speaking. "I died at 55 minutes past midnight. I know because the church bells were ringing, and the last thing I heard was Constanza singing the Lacrimosa from the Requiem. I had just written it the day before. She wanted me to hear it one last time." Everyone in the room is crying, even Dr. Hoffman. According to historical records, Mozart really did die on December 5th, 1791, shortly after midnight. And his wife, Constanze, was indeed with him in his final moments. The Lacrimosa section of the Requiem was what Mozart was working on in his last days before death. But how could a 4-year-old child know such specific details? By December 2019, the team decides to do one final test. The hardest one, the most important. Oliver is shown the notes of Mozart's unfinished Requiem. "If you really wrote it," Professor Adler asks gently, "can you show us how you would finish it?" This is a crazy request. The Requiem is the most important unfinished work in music history. Many composers tried to complete it over the centuries. Mozart's student Süssmayr made the most well-known version, but it was considered incomplete. Oliver examines the notes. A long silence. Then he lifts his head. "Yes, I can show you, but I need a full orchestra to hear if it's right." This seems like an impossible request, but the music director of the Vienna Chamber Orchestra, Maestro Johannes Falk, has heard the news. He wants to meet Oliver. January 2020, a small gathering is held in the back rehearsal hall of the Musikverein. 30 musicians, assembled for Oliver. The child is given a piano and asked to play the unfinished sections of the Requiem. Oliver starts playing, and the music that emerges. Maestro Falk closes his eyes. The musicians pick up their instruments, begin to follow the melody the child is playing. The music is painfully beautiful, completely in Mozart's style, perfect adherence to Baroque and classical period rules, but never heard before. Oliver plays for 40 minutes straight, filling in the incomplete sections. When he finally stops, there's absolute silence in the hall. Maestro Falk is the first to speak. Das ist unmöglich. This is impossible. This child is either a genius or," he pauses, "or really is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart." The recordings are sent to academics, analyzed, compared. And the result is surprising. Oliver's completion is more consistent than Süssmayr's version, more appropriate to Mozart's known style, harmonic structure more correct. As if, one musical analysis report writes, the composer came back and finished his own work, February 2020. Oliver and his family now want to return to England. But there's one more stop. Stephansdom Cathedral, the heart of Vienna. Mozart's funeral had been held here. Oliver is tense when they enter the church. "I don't like this place," he says. "It was raining when they brought my coffin here. Very few people came. I was already forgotten." Historical records confirm him. Very few people had indeed attended Mozart's funeral. The weather was bad. By then, he was already beginning to lose his fame. But Oliver says something more. There was one man who cried. An old man. He stood in the back. He was the only one who really cried for me, not just for my music. I never knew his name. I wish I could thank him. This detail isn't recorded anywhere, but Dr. Steiner pays attention. Oliver, can you describe that man? He had white hair, walked with a cane, wore a green coat with silver buttons. In the following weeks, historians begin searching records, and they find an observer, name not given, mentioned seeing an elderly man, green coat, cane, at Mozart's funeral. A small note, a forgotten detail. Oliver had remembered him. April 2020. When the pandemic hits the world, research stops. But by then, enough evidence has been gathered. Professor Adler and his team publish their report. The Oliver Matthews Case, an investigation into possible reincarnation memories. 347 pages, full documentation, video, audio recordings, historical verifications, musical analyses. The conclusion section is carefully written. We cannot definitively prove reincarnation, but we can state that Oliver Matthews possesses knowledge, abilities, and memories that are scientifically inexplicable through normal means. He has demonstrated 1. Expert-level musical ability with no training. Knowledge of unpublished historical details. 3. Correct predictions of undiscovered artifacts. 4. Authentic 18th century behavioral patterns. 5. Emotional responses consistent with Mozart's documented life. While skeptics may propose alternative explanations, none adequately account for the totality of evidence. We conclude that Oliver's case merits serious scientific consideration as potential evidence of consciousness, continuity beyond death. The report creates a worldwide sensation. Some scientists call it proof. Others offer cautious support. Media goes wild. But Oliver himself? He's just trying to be a normal child. October 2024. Today, Oliver is 9 years old. He goes to a normal English elementary school. He plays football. He plays video. Games, he has friends. But he still plays piano, now taking regular lessons. And still, sometimes, he says strange things. Last week, Sarah found him in his room writing music. "What are you writing, sweetheart?" she asked. "Something I never finished," Oliver replied. "From before, a symphony, number 42. I always wanted to write it, but I ran out of time." Sarah isn't surprised anymore. "Maybe you can finish it in this life?" Oliver smiled. "Maybe. I have more time now." Professor Adler still follows Oliver. They meet twice a year, do new tests. And each time Oliver remembers something more, a detail, a melody, a name. Last month, Oliver said something that the professor hasn't reported yet, because he can't make sense of it. "There are others like me, other children who remember. They're waking up all over the world, and we're supposed to do something together, something important. But I don't know what it is yet." The professor asked, "Who else, Oliver? Other composers?" The child shook his head. "Not just composers. Artists, scientists, teachers, people who died with work unfinished. We're coming back to finish it." This is an idea for madness. But Professor Adler no longer has the luxury of not taking Oliver seriously. Because if Oliver is Mozart, and if others are really coming too, the world is about to become a very different place. One final note. The manuscripts Oliver discovered are now displayed in a special section of the Salzburg Museum. The title, The Hidden Compositions, discovered by Oliver Matthews, 2019. And every year, on December 5th, the anniversary of Mozart's death, Oliver gives a small concert at Stephansdom. He plays pieces from the Requiem. In the back rows of the cathedral, the same old man always sits, wearing a green coat, walking with a cane. But this is impossible. That man should have died in 1791.